and welcome to this video. So in this video, I want to share with you my entire painting process. From my concept drawings to stretching the canvas to priming and to finally painting. The painting that I'm going to be sharing with you today is this painting entitled Wildly Fun But Alone. This painting was exhibited last February at the Pinto Art Museum. It's a mixed media on canvas and the size is 2.5 by 5 feet. So I worked on this painting for about, 6 months. It took that long because I didn't really work on it like every day. It was sort of segments. So the first segment was studying perspective. I actually graduated from art school, art college. I have a bachelor's degree in fine art, but I'm still not good at perspective. So that says a lot when you're an artist. It doesn't mean that you know everything if you went to college, and there are a lot of things that you want to learn along the way. So for me, I've always been doing a one-point perspective in my painting. So there's usually one woman, I love using the woman figure, and a lot of decorative aspects around her. But for this painting, I want to explore a 5-point perspective or a fisheye perspective. So I didn't know how to actually do that. So I started researching using books. So I used this book. I practiced from 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, 4 point for a month. I had it was really tough because I hate drawing lines. I avoid drawing lines. And this painting had me graphing all the way from the draft to the final drawing. And I was just tired. I think after 2 months of drawing, I didn't work on it for 2 weeks, and then I came back, and then I still felt tired. And that's part of the process, and that's fine. But looking at this painting, I'm actually very proud of how it looked, because since it's my first time, I'm gonna give myself some space not to nitpick a lot and just to move on to the next painting. But with this painting, I think I really like how it turned. So this painting is about the pedestrian lane in the Philippines. So if you've been to the Philippines, you know that everything here is pretty much very chaotic. It's just things upon things on things. Roads, cars on cars, and motorcycles, and people are just all around. I also draw inspiration from the Tokyo crossing scene. I saw a video here on YouTube, and it was so great, like how the people are walking in this really nice pedestrian road. And when you look at photographies online, the photograph curve, because it's like the fish islands of the city. That's the feel that I want to take. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you learned something, and I hope that I could share more of this.
Welcome to the voiceover. So let's start with the concept sketches. This first sketch is the first ever sketch that I made for this painting. One afternoon, I was sitting by myself inside my studio, and I suddenly had this imagery inside my head, and it's an image of a chaotic, bustling, surreal cityscape. I grabbed the closest sketchbook and I drew this. As you can see, it's very rough, and there are a lot more notes and squiggly, ugly lines all around it. This is how an idea usually starts for me. I see it so clear inside my head, and when I translate it, it's not as clear. It just looks rough. But the more I realize that this is the process of painting, you will learn along the way that it is entirely possible that the images inside your head can be seen as long as you stick with your vision and you try your best to progress with your work. You really have to work towards that imagery, and you have to grab on it and try to find a way on how you are going to show it to people, because no one can see the images inside your head, and it's your goal as an artist or as a painter to show these images. And creating a rough drawing just to see how you want it to be, it's a great way to cement the foundation of your idea. After this rough image building, I would then search for references. References are very important, especially in my process, because they help me understand what does my vision look like in real life and how do I want this imagery to actually work. So the images in my head can become clearer when I find the right references. And finding the right references usually takes time. And I've learned throughout the years that you could just come across on it actually everywhere. So bring your phone, your camera, or save anything that you will find online. So these are printed references of the Tokyo pedestrian crossing. I said a while ago how interested I was about these images, how these images curved and how they give this almost surreal landscape feel of a cityscape. So through Google and some research books, I found out that these were rendered in a curvilinear perspective, or what commonly known as the fisheye or the 5-point perspective. Given that knowledge, I started practicing the basics of perspective until I came to a point that I can basically make perspective sketches. The next images are more rough drawings of a cityscape. At this point, I'm using references and my learned knowledge, and I'm trying to decide how am I going to compose the image using the curvilinear perspective. I experimented with the different positions of the walkway, and I stumbled upon this drawing of a walkway right in the middle of the composition. And as I'm looking at it, it didn't give me the dynamic that I want to see. Rather, it bored me a little that the walkway was in the middle. So I fiddled with the idea of placing the walkway either on the left, going to the right, or vice versa. After some time, I stumbled upon this drawing. The walkway starts from the left as it diminishes to the right, and I decided that this is the composition that I would like to go. It is dynamic enough for me, and it shifts the focus to the people rather than the chaotic city at the back. However, the more I look at it, the more I see that it didn't have any focus. Probably because this draft contained many people crossing and it just looks so muddled. To shift the focus a bit more on the walkway, I decided to use less people and make it interesting. I used varied creatures from the Philippine mythology and my own characters. This composition made sense with me. With that, I rendered it in a cleaner way. This sketch is the line work that I will use as a guide in my painting. As you can see in this image, there is a train coming from the right side, the curving cities on the left side, cars coming from the back to the front, a series of Philippine mythological creatures like the Bakunawa eating the moon, a tikbalang crossing. There is also a pugot, a manananggal chasing half of its body, and several other personal character designs. And at this point, I can see how I will translate every idea I have in the final painting. The entire drawing took about 2 months. Continuous study of references, continuous rough drawings until the final line work. In truth, I could have made my last drawing a bit cleaner, but I think I can correct my mistakes while painting. This drawing is enough for me to function as a blueprint for my work. I also rendered it in a monotonous color so that I can focus on the shapes first, and later in my process, I could focus on the colors. Last note, I decided on the size of the canvas to be 2.5 by 5 feet because I was aiming for a wider size, and also this size was proportional to the size of the final study. Take note, it's important that your study or the drawing that you're using is proportional to your canvas or to the surface that you are working on, because if you are like me, I'm going to transfer this later using the grid method. It will look proportional if you transfer the image, and that's one point that you need to remember. Okay, so the next part, we're not painting yet, but I want to show how do I stretch and prime a canvas. So stretching and priming canvases are some of the basic skills that you might want to learn if you are going to take painting seriously. There are a lot of commercially available canvases around the world, but in my experience, it's cheaper to make your own. You can choose higher quality materials and be sure that you don't skimp on anything. I started making my own canvas since my university days. I would hire a carpenter to make a wooden frame stretcher, and using a gun tucker and canvas cloth, I would stretch the canvas by myself and then I would prime it. For this painting, it's no different. I stretched and primed the canvas by myself. I personally like making canvases without any wood backing for the reason that over time the wood backing's acidity would seep into the cloth and later the painting would have damages. So I prefer stretching with an open back. The key to this style is to properly stretch the canvas on all sides and prime it carefully layer by layer. Here, I am cutting the canvas with an allowance of at least 2 inches. You need this allowance so that you can position yourself easily while pulling the cloth on each side. It will depend on the thickness of the cloth. I am using a 10-ply cloth and it's rather thick, so I used a wooden stick to anchor the canvas while pulling. Be careful because if you pull without the proper technique, you might injure yourself or your wrist. Practice always works best. Your first canvas might be a little loose, but it will be better as long as you practice. You can search online for the folding and pulling techniques. When you finish stretching, you can now proceed to priming. Priming happens in 3 stages for me. I prefer first sizing the canvas for more stability, then applying layers of gesso, latex paint, and lastly sanding in between those layers. On average, I do about 10 layers of priming. The rule is applying a thin layer and working your way to the thickest layer by controlling the volume of water and paint. Also, since we are dealing with paint and sanding, be sure to work in a well-ventilated area. So I do about 10 layers of priming because I start with the thinnest layer. I make sure that I work my way up to the thickest layer of paint so that it would not crack over time. Also, throughout the years that I've been priming my canvas, and since I've been doing more mixed media work, I figured out that this type of priming is more stable, especially if I'm loading the canvas with a lot of materials other than paint. Priming creates a barrier from the cloth to the painting because the cloth itself is very porous and the paint will not apply smoothly if you don't prime it. You can experiment with different textures of primer. There are a range of flat finishes to glossy finishes. I prefer a 50% flat and a 50% semi-gloss. In between the thick layers of paint, I will sand before applying the next layer. It's important because as you go to the higher layer of priming, the paint actually smoothens, so it will benefit you a lot if you sand it first and then apply the next layer until you finish it, and the last layer would also be sanded. Also, this will help you if you want your canvas to be smooth. Some people like to leave it rough, so that's your choice. After this, I will let the canvas rest for about 72 hours. You want the paint, the water, the sizing medium to dry. You want them to dry before actually painting on it so that there won't be any trapped water between the layer. But sometimes when you are in a hurry, you could actually just do less layers and use it after 24 hours. But for me, I make sure and I leave about 72 hours before painting after I finish priming. After I do all of this, I'm ready to paint. Finally, Done are the study sketches, stretched the canvas and primed it, and we are ready to proceed to the actual painting. You thought that painting is actually just painting. No, as I learned throughout all of my other paintings, it's a very long process, and the more you do it, the more you're gonna get used to it, but it's that long. First, I am transferring this sketch to the canvas using a grid method. While transferring the image, I am also correcting the shapes of the elements in the painting. Usually in my sketches, I'm not really afraid of making mistakes. I just leave them as they are as long as I know where the placement is, and that actually lifts a lot of anxiety away. And the more that I do a sketch that I'm happy with, though not perfect, I could actually correct everything in the painting. The value of having a sketch is just to have that placement and to know where you are going to put everything, because if you don't sketch and you just paint and you are dealing with something very much detailed, there's gonna be a lot more work, and you are going to be spending the time that you are painting correcting your mistakes rather than actually rendering the image that you want to paint. I don't have a video of the next stages, but it looked like this and this. When I was happy with the preliminary paint layer, I started adding colors. The color palette that I went for is a teal-dominated color story that's supported by neons, pink, and violets. The color story is inspired by the city lights at night. I wanted to go full on with a magical, surreal, citypop-esque vibe. So while I'm painting, let's talk about the concept of this painting. As I was exploring this image, I thought of this imagery citing from the ending scenes in animes. If you're familiar with animes and you watch a couple of episodes, you would notice that most ending scenes in animes are these colorful illustrations of characters walking aimlessly in the city. Granted, not all animes are like this, but these serene, colorful image of reflection-like scenes in the ones that I have watched stuck in my head, and I wanted to replicate those observations in my work. Earlier also in my process, I decided about illustrating a scene here in the Philippines, and when I look back, I remember the colorful lights of the city, nameless people walking with me in the pedestrian crossing lanes, the chaos of the urban spaces, the honking of numerous cars and jeepneys. With those images inside my mind, I started to make this painting. Since I knew that this was set in the Philippines, I had to make it more relevant, and as you've seen in my concept sketches, drawing multiple people who are faceless was not going to be interesting. So in this part of the video, I want to talk about the mythical creatures that I included in this painting. Since my university days, I've been interested in the narratives of myths, and I would read countless of books about it from local authors such as Damiana Eugenio and more internationally known authors like Joseph Campbell. So I am happy that I get to involve these creatures in my work right now. In the world of the painting that I created, normal people live with these creatures. So I illustrated them as crossing a busy pedestrian road. Traditionally, these creatures are scary and monster-like, and they don't blend with society. But I was interested in the idea that what if mythical creatures live and breathe in the normal world? Of course, they would change, and I thought naturally they would get jobs and learn to live like us. Take note that these are just my interpretations, and you can look it up online what these creatures look like in a traditional art imagery. So let's start with the tikbalang. So one is a tikbalang in a suit, which is my image. But generally, a tikbalang is a gigantic creature that has a head and the hooves of a horse and a body sort of like human-like. You can think about BoJack Horseman, but the difference is the traditional depiction of a tikbalang is a monster-like creature with disproportionately long limbs. I imagined a tikbalang to be an office worker. Beside the takbalang is a pugot. A pugot is a mythical creature from folklores from the Ilocos region. It's believed to be a gigantic, headless being that can take any shape. And there wasn't much information about it. Beyond that, I drew this creature as a woman, and the design about it is that her handbag is actually her head. And I had fun designing this because of the dress and the high heels. On the left side is a manananggal. A manananggal is a blood-sucking creature with an ability to grow bat wings and separate its torso from the body. It's said that these creatures flies at night, leaving half of their body to look for prey. I was interested with this creature. I imagine that a manananggal would have an easier time working for a delivery service. They could just fly all over the city and be able to deliver without any hassle, and it's trying to catch up with half of its body on the left side of the painting. It was really fun imagining this character because I was just thinking, wouldn't half of the body, just dash around the city while the other half is flying and working? Lastly, the bakunawa eating the moon. So up above the painting is a bakunawa. A bakunawa is a sea serpent-like creature that is believed to have caused eclipses. So they were believed to have eaten the moon, and because they ate the moon, eclipses happen. So I depicted the bakunawa here through the clouds, and it's eating the moon up above the painting. The other people in the painting are just normal people walking just to create the scene. Also, the city has these advertisements all around them. There's like a train and the cars. And in the Philippines, it's very common to see all of these motorcycles just in the beginning of the road, and all of these cars just trying to put their noses up above the pedestrian road. It's just that chaotic here. So that's also the basis of how everything else looked. So lastly, we go to the mixed media part. So a lot of my works are actually done with mixed media. So what do I mean by mixed media? I usually add glitters, stones, and some other things in my work. But in this work, I put glitters and stones, especially in the shadows of the characters. They are made from pure glitter, and some of the characters had accent stones in them. And I really love putting glitters and stones in my work. There is an experience of glamour that always interests me when putting mixed media in my artworks. And when you looked at it in person, it feels like it's moving. And in this work, because it's a city and there are a lot of elements around it, doesn't the city at night feel like it's glittering and just a mixture of different texture and colors? So I have some footages of the group exhibition at the Pinto Museum as a bonus. Sadly, I think this will be the last exhibit of the year when I can celebrate exhibition openings with my friends because of the pandemic. And it was really fun because this exhibition was actually made by a group of friends from the university. So some of my classmates and some of my upperclassmen, we were invited to do a show, and it's a group show. And group shows are exciting, especially if you know the people who you are showing with. It's kind of sentimental because since this will be the last exhibition that I will be there presently on the opening, and some people could actually celebrate it with me. So that's it. I hope that I get to share my process in a way that can help people. If you have suggestions, comments, or anything that you want to ask me, just comment down below. I hope you enjoy watching this video and stay tuned for more. I've been filming a lot and doing a lot of things. And yeah, thank you so much for watching this video.